I keep returning to Hollow Knight. I've played it at least once every year since the game came out in 2017. Every time I foolishly think to myself, I'll just play a couple hours, I don't need to finish. There have been games I've obsessively replayed before, but nothing has unearthed the same feelings in me as Hollow Knight. This video isn't just about the game being good, but why it continues to be compelling. And to answer that, I need to look not just at the game itself, but about how it compares to the rest of the industry and how it compares to the games that inspired it. So let's descend into Hollow Knight. There's an enormous divide in the video game industry between the big-budget AAA games and the micro-budget indie games made by small teams. That's an overgeneralization, but I think the industry has polarized along these lines with little in the middle. The difference is more than just a difference in budget, too, but in how that budget influences their design choices. The bigger the game, the more likely it is to offset its cost with every newfangled form of monetization and microtransaction. It's all so exhausting, and it has alienated me from most games of this nature. But it's not just about paid add-ons. All of these games want to wring as many minutes of attention as they can from their audiences, which has led to an endless bloat of meaningless, low-effort side content that balloons the size of the game. This has an enormous impact on the way I remember most of these games. There's a lot to be said for ending a story well, and most big-budget games aren't designed to end when the credits roll. They end an indeterminate number of hours later after the player just sort of gets bored with the side quests and moves on. So many of these ginormous games feel like if The Godfather had an extra hour of runtime that was just Michael doing chores around the house. On the complete opposite side of the industry are a handful of indie games that are focused entirely on taking the player on a singular and complete journey and ending on the highest of notes. In the last year or so, I've played Outer Wilds, Disco Elysium, Return of the Obra Dinn, and The Witness. Aesthetically and mechanically, the games couldn't be more different. Outer Wilds is an outer space exploration game that puts you in the role of a sort of archaeologist, piecing together how an ancient civilization fell. Disco Elysium is a small-town murder mystery role-playing game, where you play as a drunk, depressed cop. Return of the Obra Dinn is also a murder mystery game, but with unique time-traveling mechanics and pointillist graphics. The Witness is an abstract puzzle game with a minimalist story and an unnerving atmosphere. But what all of these games have in common is that during their final hours, they cast a spell on me that puts me into this strange, frenzied flow state gaming where I feel like I am racing towards the center of the universe and the answers to the meaning of life. Not a single element of their design distracts from this. Even though some of them have optional content, like Disco Elysium, they all feel like they might actually be connected to the central story. And besides, the game does such a great job of making every single character in the game unique that I really do want to hear what they all have to say. But the other thing these games have in common is that when I finished them, I was done. Finishing those games felt like being kicked out of the Matrix, being jolted back into reality. I haven't actually played any of them past their credit rolls, but I think about them constantly. They are games that I wish I could forget so that I could experience them again for the first time. Each of these games are phenomenal experiences in different ways that I can't recommend enough, so it isn't really a criticism to point out that they are also short-lived. So I've started to feel like most of the video game experiences I have these days are either frustrated by monetization and bloat, or singular world-changing experiences that are over in a minute. And then there's Hollow Knight. Like all of the indie games listed here, Hollow Knight puts me into that magical flow state of gaming. Thanks in part to the silky smooth feeling of the combat, which makes me feel like I am in a cartoon version of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It's a game that's endlessly replayable. It's always fun. Hollow Knight had DLC too, but they were released for free, and none of them get in the way of the main thrust of the story. For me, it lands somewhere in the middle of these two poles in the industry, with the strengths of both and the weaknesses of neither. Okay, but what exactly is Hollow Knight? Perhaps even more than any other medium, video games are really just a collection of their inspirations. Hollow Knight is a Metroidvania Souls-like game. That's a lot of jargon, so let's break down each of those words. Metroidvania is the name of a genre of games styled after the Metroid series and the Castlevania series. These are side-scrolling games, but rather than the run to the right until you win type of games like Mario, these games are non-linear. You are exploring a two-dimensional space that loops back in on itself in interesting ways. At the beginning of the game, game, your character doesn't have all of the abilities they'll need to travel everywhere, but eventually you'll find the items or learn the skills that you need to access other parts of the map, shortcuts between locations, and secret rooms in locations you've been before. This requires the player to be mindful of their environment at all times and to backtrack across the world when they get those new abilities, which makes the player more familiar with the environment than they would be in, for instance, a Mario game. All of that is a perfect description of the exploration mechanics in Hollow Knight. It's actually kind of brilliant that someone looked at the maps of Metroid and Castlevania, said, that kind of looks like an ant farm, and then just did those games but with a bug aesthetic. At the same time, Hollow Knight is a Souls-like game. Souls-like describes any game that emulates the design philosophy of games by From Software, which includes Demon's Souls, Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, Bloodborne, and Sekiro. The popularity of the genre really kicked off with the first Dark Souls game, though, and I think Hollow Knight is closer to that game than any of its own sequels. There are at least 3 qualities that define what a Souls-like game is, all of which are found in Hollow Knight: difficulty, environmental storytelling, and interconnected geography. Number 1, difficulty. Souls-like games are most famously known for being really friggin' hard. Your character is pretty weak at the start and can be killed easily by even the most common enemies in the game, so players have to actually learn their opponent's moves and strike at the right time. You're also punished enormously for failure. When you die in a Dark Souls game, you don't just respawn directly outside the room you died in like you would in most other modern video games, but instead you respawn at the last bonfire you sat down at, which might be a 5-minute hike away from the prick that just killed you. And more than that, you lose all of your money. When you die, you are given exactly 1 chance to retrieve your loot if you can make it back to the place you were killed. The result of all of this is that the player is incentivized to go down the same path in the game until they have built up a familiarity with the world and the enemies. These aren't games that you can just rush your way through, at least not for most players. For all of those reasons, even after years of not playing Dark Souls 1, I can remember the layout of that game top to bottom as if it was my childhood home. Number 2, environmental storytelling. The second quality that defines the genre is that the narrative isn't conventionally told. In Dark Souls, you get a cutscene at the beginning that explains the backstory of the world, but after that, it's sort of up to you to piece together what happened. You don't have characters walking around with you making sure you understand each plot point. If you want to be Sherlock Holmes and piece together every bit of the puzzle, you're welcome to, but it's not required. The benefit of this is Souls-like games very rarely take control away from the player. You're almost always actually playing the game, not watching a cutscene, which again helps build a sense of immersion and connection to the world. And it makes the discovery of the true narrative rewarding because it's self-motivated. Number 3, interconnected geography. The original Dark Souls is also a Metroidvania game, just in 3 dimensions instead of 2. You're exploring an interconnected environment and getting stronger to open up new areas. But another quality of Metroidvanias is that because they are traditionally in 2 dimensions, their game design necessitates some amount of verticality. In order for the environments to loop back on themselves in 2D, you pretty much need to send the player up or down, which creates a layered environment. The original Dark Souls retains this idea to an astonishing degree. You start at Firelink Shrine and can work your way up to Undead Parish or down through the depths and into the abyss, all without interruption. This kind of vertical design is a key part of the original Dark Souls, but it's not necessarily a key part of the genre. None of the other From Software games are as vertical as Dark Souls 1. They sometimes connect this way, but usually each of the distinct environments will have smaller loops and shortcuts within themselves rather than between the different regions. Bloodborne has a kind of gentle slope to it with the forest area at a lower elevation than the cathedral, but there aren't, say, a half-dozen regions located directly beneath the cathedral. And this is actually a part of the original Dark Souls that I have really missed. I want more games to have this kind of design. Actually, I don't just want more games like this, I have a nearly unscratchable itch for more games like this. A huge part of the thrill of that game is knowing exactly where you were in relation to everything else, and learning what you needed to do to get from one place to another. And it's why that world has entrenched itself so firmly in my memory. I don't really get the same experience playing the other From Software games. The combat feels similar, but the exploration does not. Part of that is because there's less of an emphasis on verticality, and the other reason is because those games let you ping pong around the map much more easily. In the endgame of the original Dark Souls, you get a power that lets you teleport to any of the other bonfires you've discovered in the game. Up until this point, if you descended down into Blight Town and wanted to go back up to Sen's Fortress, you had to manually climb from one to the other, but now you can click a button and speed the process up, which is fine because at that point you've done enough backtracking. In the other games, you're given this power right at the start. And I can't really overstate how much this diminishes a huge part of the way I get invested in these kinds of worlds. The ease of teleportation makes things more convenient, but I don't get as connected to the environment. It makes it easier for me to get to the combat, but it makes it harder for me to care about the combat. It's also not something I can just opt out of. In order to level up in Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne, you're actually required to teleport to another place, which for me shatters the immersion the game is building within the environment. And then there's Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight's world design is much closer to the original Dark Souls than any of the other From Software games. Like Metroidvania games, it has an extremely layered environment, and the relative elevation of each region makes sense in the logic of the world and helps to characterize that region and the ones around it. The ancient basin only makes sense at the bottom of the world. The City of Tears is obviously the capital city of this world because it's at the center. There are ways to fast travel around the world, but they are not given immediately, and they are also diegetic. They are part of the world. There isn't this contrivance of teleporting from one place to another or into a dream or whatever. You have to find train stations or stag stations, which then physically take you to another spot on the map. Now, to be clear, I'm not some Dark Souls purist here. It's not a perfect video game that can't be iterated on or changed, but the specific kind of experience I had with the exploration in Dark Souls had a profound effect on me, and the only other game that has scratched that particular itch is Hollow Knight. But to give you the impression that Hollow Knight is just a replacement for Dark Souls would undersell my thoughts on the game, which is its own unique experience. In Hollow Knight, you play as a nameless insect knight-errant exploring the fallen kingdom of Hallownest. Fallen kingdoms are a trope of the Souls-like genre, but where the Souls games mostly use that backdrop to create a sense of horror and dread, Hollow Knight almost always presents it as a place of beauty as well. Every moment of Hollow Knight is lovingly hand-drawn, and most of it is bursting with color. It's a joy to simply wander through the world as if it were an art museum. It's never just beautiful, though. It's always mixed in with this sense of sadness, loss, and melancholy. Because again, you're exploring a ruined world. The evidence of death and tragedy is everywhere. A lot of what brings me back to Hollow Knight isn't just the game itself, but the state of the world. Part of the appeal of all post-apocalyptic media is being able to face the anxiety of civilizational collapse and achieve a sense of catharsis or closure from having done so. The times I've gone back to Hollow Knight are times when I am feeling despondent about the future, about global warming, and now the pandemic. The game meets you at that feeling. It begins in darkness and a sense of doom, but then it makes you comfortable in that gloomy space, even if it doesn't actually get better. Hallownest is ruined. It will never be put back to the way it was, at least not during our time there, but that's okay. There's a trend on TikTok right now where people film themselves restocking their homes or reorganizing something. A lot of people find them soothing and reassuring. They get the sense of things being back to normal. I think a lot of video games fulfill the same function psychologically. In so many games, everything is out of place and chaotic at the beginning, and if you're a completionist, by the end of the game, you've solved every problem, found every missing item, and returned the world to normal. Hollow Knight has that sense to an extent too. There are people to save and items to find, but the ending is not one of cathartic celebration. Instead, it feels more akin to the release of phantom pain. Cathartic, yes, but melancholic still. Here's what I mean. Because of its Souls-like and Metroidvania design, the player is sent through the same passages again and again. At first, every enemy is difficult, and you'll probably spend a lot of time methodically defeating every creature you encounter. Eventually though, once the player knows where the enemies are and what they can do, they'll likely realize that they can run past most of the basic encounters in the game when they are backtracking through the levels. And as you uncover the mysteries of the game's plot, you'll also learn that enemies in the game aren't actually evil, they're sick. They've been infected by a force that makes them lash out violently at everything around them, making them obstacles for you, but not your enemies. As a result, Hallownest stops becoming a place you are slowly conquering, but a place that you are supposed to take care of. The more I wander Hallownest, the more I feel at home there, even though it is ruined, even though there is tragedy around every step. Rather than resolving the chaos in the world, you instead acclimate yourself to the chaos. There's no completely positive ending to Hollow Knight. It would feel completely at odds with this world if you could just swing your sword and restore everything back to the way it was. The most you can do is put things to rest, beat back the infection and the darkness that plagues the world just a little bit. Despondency about the state of the world comes from a lack of power, an inability to control or influence what's happening around you. Hollow Knight simulates dealing with that feeling, and in its closing moments it instills in me a sense of peace. The game is, on its own merits, phenomenal, but the context in which it exists within the wider video game industry as a product of its inspirations and as a piece of post-apocalyptic media made when apocalypse feels on the horizon elevates it into something I am drawn back into again and again and again. Between Hollow Knight, Dark Souls, and some other projects I'm working on, I've been spending a lot of time in the horror genre. Specifically, I've been researching cosmic horror, so I just watched the Nicolas Cage version of Color Out of Space on Shudder, the sponsor of this video. Shudder is the Netflix of horror, a streaming service dedicated entirely to the genre, with original productions that you can't find anywhere else, like the revival of Creepshow. Color Out of Space is an adaptation of the H.P. Lovecraft story which tackles that source material in a really clever way. They've also got Mandy if one psychedelic Nicolas Cage movie that's shockingly good isn't enough for you. If you too want to take a dive into the dark recesses of the horror genre, then you can get a 30-day free trial by going to shudder.com and using the promo code JUSTRIGHT. After that, it's $5.99 a month. Just click on the link in the description of this video and use the promo code JUSTRIGHT. Thanks for watching, everyone, and a big thank you to my patrons for supporting this channel. Keep writing, everyone.